I'd like to thank Rory and the organizers of Nudgestock for including me in my content on this program to bring diversity to what's being said here, because nothing of what I'm going to share with you today has any redeeming social value at all, will not solve any pressing problem for humanity, and will not make the world a fairer and more just place. The case histories I'm going to talk to you about are in utterly worthless and contemptible categories, such as soft drinks, beer, and the such. But for all of you who are struggling with how to, if you're in something that involves pleasure and responsibility, and you're trying to figure out what is a positioning for a brand that has a new rational benefit, many times the way to unlock its potential is in fact to get into very emotional, very irrational drivers. So here are 5 truly legendary case histories, big, huge brands, big, huge results. And you'll see in each of the case histories, there's a struggle on the part of the owner of the brand to connect with a human truth. And they're so impressed with their rational benefit, so puffed up about it, they can't see the reality that's right in front of them. So the first one is an anti-littering campaign by the Department of Transportation in the great state of Texas. So you can see on the left the campaign that ran for years on highways all over Texas, trying to reduce people throwing trash out their car windows. And you'll see that it's very honorable. It has a very, it's appealing to pride, isn't it? Everyone's proud of where they live, and so it says, keep Texas beautiful. And it didn't do shit. They brought in a great agency in Austin, Texas, GSD&M, and they asked them if they had any ideas on what could be done that would be better. And one of the things they did was they said, well, who litters the most? Do you have any data on that? And they did. The people most likely to throw trash out their car windows in Texas were young teenage males and young adult males. So it was the prospect for behavior change was 16 to 35-year-old Texas male. And they called them Bubbas. So they tended to drive pickup trucks, they like to drink beer, they like to watch wrestling on TV. I'm really very conscious of the fact that I'm just loading one bias after another when I say this, but they're real. And so they had an idea which was to appeal to a more rebel instinct in the tone of how they would say it. And so they came up with this idea of don't mess with Texas. Every state is always very proud of itself, and many times it opposes itself to the identity of the neighboring state. That certainly is the case in Texas, and it's a favorite sport in Texas to speak ill of people who come from Oklahoma. Someone I know from the neighboring state, someone I know from West Texas once said to me, if I owned property in Oklahoma and in hell, I'd rent out Oklahoma. And so what they did here was they basically said, if you're throwing trash out your car window, well, you must be from goddamn Oklahoma. So they appealed to tribal pride rather than to this honorable concept of keep Texas beautiful. So instead of talking to your higher self about a higher message, they talk to your lower self about a higher message. Don't mess with Texas. And when this was presented by the agency to the Texas Department of Transportation, someone there said, this is really awful. It's quite vulgar. I mean, look, again, refer to the one on the left. Keep Texas beautiful. And I don't like the tone of it. No. And then the agency said, we stand by this idea. We think we guarantee that it's going to work. We stake our reputation on it. And then the client said, could you just add the word please? And finally, there was only one person left at the Department of Transportation who agreed to run this campaign at the peril of their future job safety, and they did it. And the result of it is that they achieved in 4 years a 72% reduction in the amount of litter being thrown out of car windows on Texas highways. It is the single greatest anti-littering campaign result ever achieved. It's historic. The phrase is now on T-shirts in Texas, and it's become part of the pop culture. It's parodied a million different ways. So higher self, higher concept, lower appeal to it. This might help with the brief that we received from Professor Frank this morning. Right? The world is becoming uninhabitable. The only thing that we can do to solve that is to have massive federal programs. These will require higher taxes. This is something that could come from this case history that might inspire that. If you'll hire me, Professor Frank, I'll show you how to do it. And the second one here is another piece of pop culture that is now famous all over the world, shows up in a million and myriad memes. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What I wanted to share with you is that the brief that the agency got had nothing to do with this idea. The brief that they got was from the tourism board of the city of Las Vegas, and the brief was, you need to get us away from gambling. Everybody thinks that that is the number one thing that you do in Vegas, but God damn it, don't make them understand that we have some of the best cuisine in the world. Famous chefs from all over the world are here. We have world-class entertainment. There are these excursions that you can take into the extraordinary desert that's here. Fabulous resorts, a wonderful time for the whole family. Just get us away from gambling. Do something, because we've got to compete with Cancun. And so the psychological insight that the agency brought to it is when people are in Vegas, they connect with their alter ego. They find a certain freedom just being there to be someone that they wouldn't normally be in everyday life. And that is how they came up with, that insight led directly to this slogan. They stole the slogan from the American organization Alcoholics Anonymous, which apparently has yet to appear in England. And they, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say there, who you see here, let it stay here. What you heard here, let it stay here. And they literally ripped it off, which I think is a beautiful irony, right? AA gave Las Vegas its slogan. And this also had a massive systemic business positive change for them and led to year in, year out, double-digit growth in trips to Las Vegas, including right through the 2008 recession. Instead of trying to clean up the image of Las Vegas, they made it even naughtier. On the left is an ad from the 1970s from, Rory, you're going to have to forgive me for this, it's from Ogilvy. And it's someone who's doing a very bad imitation of David Ogilvy here with the copy. But this is the launch of Gablinger's beer, which was the first beer with low carbohydrates. And it was a complete bomb. And the beer industry, they all had the ability to make these beers with low carbohydrates, and Gablinger's was the first to go, but they were all afraid to do it because they were afraid that it would be perceived as a low status beer. Why would you drink such a thing? And so Miller, the distant number 2 to Budweiser, had the very simple idea of, instead of trying to appeal to the rational benefit, instead of trying to run ads that say, here's how to not get a beer gut, they featured year in and year out boozy, brosy jocks having arguments in neighborhood pubs and bars about whether light beer tastes great or less filling. And it became one of the most famous campaigns of that decade. Tastes great, less filling. And the way that they did it, it made you understand that the benefit wasn't about weight management. The benefit was about being able to comfortably have more than one or two because it's less filling. And the result of this campaign and this launch was staggering. And Miller actually outperformed its nemesis, Budweiser, took a huge share away from them. And it took Budweiser many years to recover because they inevitably produced Bud Light. So if you're making a beer that tones down beer, position it as one that makes the experience even more beersy enjoyable. Here is an ad for Tab from Coca-Cola. I'm just letting you absorb it if you can see it and get the full Don Draper patronizing to women. Horrific. I can't believe that my mother and grandmother ever even drank this ad for Tab. So Coca-Cola sacralized the sugar content. The sugar is the reward, they thought. If you talk to the actual liquid scientists at Coca-Cola, they could tell you that there's a lot more to drinking a soft drink than sugar and the sugar rush. There's also the trigeminal stimulation. Rory, do you know what trigeminal stimulation is? Okay. Yes, and by the way, he's over there vaping his brains out. So the trigeminal nerve, I'm showing you where it is. If you stimulate it with heat or cold, it feeds directly into your brain and it slightly alleviates depression. And so the things that stimulate it are that heat and that cold, but also carbon dioxide, also anything irritating like wasabi. You get that pleasure release inside your brain. So they actually had the ability to make fantastic soft drinks with rich trigeminal stimulation, but they thought if it doesn't have sugar, then it's not worthy of the Coke name. So they launched this beverage as Tab to protect the integrity of the Coke brand name. And they made it, as you can see, they made a very rational benefit. You have to watch your figure. And then Don Draper made it very imaginative with this expression that nobody used in America except Tab, which was, be a mind sticker. While he's away on his travels, are you in his mind? Be a mind sticker. And it wasn't until they at Coca-Cola, they went through the internal ritual of changing the ingredients of Tab, but came up with something that has the same bracing, acidic, stimulating flavor as Diet Coke. And the brilliance of the campaign that grew it and made it the #1 soft drink in America is it no longer had any rational benefit. Of course, it was inherent in the name, but if you looked at everything else in the communication, it had an exuberance and I don't care, I just like it kind of feeling. Even just the great slogan, just for the taste of it. No one says that in normal speech, but we do say things like just for the hell of it, just for the fun of it, just for the et cetera of it. And so here it took them 10 years to work their way out of rational benefit positioning into hedonic positioning. And once they did that for this very rational product, sales took off. Last one is milk. So milk consumption had been going down year in, year out by small amounts, always just getting a little bit weaker every year. And so the American Dairy Association did all of this research. By the way, forgetting what David Ogilvy taught us that was quoted earlier today, we don't think what we feel, we don't say what we think, and we don't do what we say. And they made the mistake of asking people, why aren't you drinking milk? And they would actually get answers like, well, I don't think it's necessarily so good for you once you're an adult and you don't need it anymore. Maybe when you're a kid and you're growing up. So this is in the 80s. And Americans were now, Jane Fonda was teaching us how to do, what was it called, jazzercise? And people were out doing this thing called jogging. And so they came up with this great idea, which is you'd see an advert and you'd see all these people out, like, look, they're all running in the park and they have sweatbands on their heads. And then they finish their run and then they open up 8 fluid ounces of milk and drink it. And this was $100 million a year, one of the biggest ad agencies in America doing it. Probably gagging while doing so, and running it, and like Keep Texas Beautiful, it didn't do shit. So the only successful thing that ever increased milk sales was made by Goodby, Berlin, Silverstein in San Francisco, and here they were working for the California Fluid Milk Processors Association, and they couldn't figure out what to do, but they knew an insight that everybody who was involved in the promoting of milk always ignored, which is we always have milk, Americans always have milk in association with something else, the milk and they hated talking about that. You can imagine you're going to your client and you're showing this to them and they don't know anything about it. They're going to say, excuse me, there seems to be a mistake here. I'm not in the cookie business, right? So it was never seriously looked at until they did deprivation research. So they would get consumers to agree for 1 week to not drink milk. So I'd come to you and say, for $250, all you have to do is just not have any milk at home and not drink milk for the week, and then come back on Saturday and just tell me what your impressions were. For $250, people would say, sure. And then when they would come back in to report on their findings, they would all be angry that they had agreed to do the research. And then they would tell stories like, I had a horrible day at the office, I picked up my favorite Mrs. Fields cookies, I brought them home, I sat down, I finally relaxed, I pulled out my cookie, and then I was like, oh shit. And so it wasn't until they saw that research that they realized that in fact, the milk and was that they shouldn't reject it, they should embrace it, because they could position milk as something like an essential fluid that you must have for the enjoyment of certain occasions. And the communication that you're looking at there is one of the first that appeared for it, and it's actually shopper marketing. So they place this in grocery carts. And so what happens is they're no longer trying to convince you that milk is good for you. They're talking to someone who already drinks milk, and they're basically making you ask, do I have enough at home? And just getting people who are not entirely sure if they have enough milk remaining at home, particularly in a multi-person household, who knows who hit the milk last night, you buy milk, and it increased the sales. So what I like about it is embracing how people use it, taking away your pride in your product and being willing to look at where it actually lives in people's lives, and not doing something as ridiculous as trying to say that milk is good for you. That's my presentation.